going to talk voting, which, depending on where you're coming from, it could be a light topic. If you're like me, where election day is like my Super Bowl, I love it. I love the energy, the buzz. I love going to the polls. But, this year, things have really changed when it comes to elections. The headline for Peggy Noonan's column in this weekend's Wall Street Journal, "Get ready for an election crisis." The top early Sunday edition of the Minnesota Star Tribune, Minnesota section of the Star Tribune, state urges voting absentee. So the state, in fact, the Secretary of State is urging that in Minnesota. And Minnesota was one of the states that started early voting on Friday. In fact, my mom did that. I saw the mayor of Duluth tweeting about how she did that. To get into this, a gentleman who has written about this topic, it's very passionate for him. He's a radio host and analyst out of Denver. I've been on his show many times. He comes on this show. We love talking politics and voting. He is Jimmy Sengenberger. Jimmy, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Roshini, thanks for having me. It's great to talk about this critical issue at a very important time in our country.
Okay, so it involves a lot of different things. So first of all, let's get into this whole mail-in ballots thing, because in your state of Colorado, your Secretary of State and your Attorney General sued the Postmaster General. In fact, you wrote a column about it. And then about the next day or so, the feds, or the Postmaster, the USPS, settled with the state in kind of a first of its kind. Now the state of Colorado gets to actually use or share or advise on language that the post office sends to the people of Colorado. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Well, it was actually a week later. My column got in there to the Federalist about just shy of a week after that lawsuit had been filed. But it's so interesting because what this goes to more than anything is it was the latest instance of, in this case, because elections this year are so partisan, Democrats looking to the Postal Service as the place to put any blame for vote-by-mail issues that are inevitably going to come up, not because the Postal Service is falling on the job, but because there are states across the country who are for the first time moving swiftly to a vote-by-mail system, whereas here in Colorado, we switched to universal mail balloting in 2013, 2014 after nearly 2 decades of working to get to that point. We were the third state after Oregon and Washington to make that switch. And even in the last 5-6 years, we've made a lot of improvements and safeguards. And so I'm expecting that, especially with the late counting of ballots after Election Day, the accepting of mail ballots after Election Day, and states that don't have adequate safeguards, that you're really going to have some questions about election integrity that couldn't come, in my view, at a worse time when we've got a very polarized country, very divided country, but also a presidential election year.
Yeah, Jimmy, this is what I'm concerned about, that election integrity. We've talked about absentee, mail-in ballots, those kinds of things. And first of all, let's just clarify, because people can request a ballot and vote absentee. Maybe they're not going to be available. Maybe they have some, physical ailment that prevents them from getting there on November 3rd. Maybe they live out of state. So there are always wonderful reasons to vote absentee. My whole thing is I want you to vote. Where the potential fraud comes in is if something happens to those ballots in the mail on the way to getting counted, and there's not enough time. So what I'm hearing from you and what I saw in your writings is that you want all these other states, Minnesota included, to not try to rush this for election 2020.
That's exactly right. I think that if you don't have all the mechanisms in place to make sure that you do have that election integrity, because particularly you don't have the experience with this kind of voting, you got to be careful. I mean, here in Colorado, so there is a difference between absentee and universal mail balloting. And I know in the states like Minnesota, where you have to request a ballot, there's a process for that. In Colorado, every voter automatically gets a ballot sent to them on October 9th. But in every state that has any of these kinds of systems, you really need to make sure that you have safeguards like signature verification, that you have surveillance of ballot drop-off locations by camera, for example, that you have election judges from both parties that are observing the counting of ballots, and that you have election officers who have enough time to get everything ready, to train their people in clerk offices, county clerk's offices, or whatever the election officials are officing out of that you have voter judges and poll watchers who are trained on the change systems and so forth. That's absolutely critical. Otherwise, you cannot guarantee that voters are going to have confidence in the result of the election. I'm very concerned about states. I know I saw Michigan allowing mail ballots to be accepted up to 14 days after Election Day. I'm very concerned about the potential for fraud, and that if you have that kind of a window, it opens the door to not only litigation, but all sorts of confidence issues for voters, fundamentally.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole thing. And I'm always going by the book. As you know, Jimmy, I'm a lover of the Constitution. And I get nervous when these extra kinds of things are put into place. Here's my thing. It is September 20th. We have known for a long, long time that election 2020 is November 3rd. I don't understand, even if you are going to do absentee and request ballots, why would you be doing that in October or the end of October? Why wouldn't you be doing it now and make sure there's safe time for it to get there and get counted?
Well, and part of it, too, is being able to make sure that the ballot language is approved and that they're printed in a timely fashion. And there aren't that many ballot printers around the country as well. So who knows if there could be holdups in those states that are still working to get their ballots prepared to get sent out. But I just look at Colorado's experience and how voters over 15 to 20 years managed to build up confidence in this idea to the point where they were on board with universal mail balloting, where they felt like it's okay for vote by mail to happen. But also, it's not just that you're casting your vote by the Postal Service. We have, for example, here in Colorado, where I vote every year since 2014. I voted in drop boxes, where I go and I put my ballot in its envelope in a drop box. Then later that day, it is picked up by a couple of poll judges who then bring them to the vote counting center, and then the counting process can go underway. That to me is a way in which to ensure that there's confidence, because you got both parties that can have election judges that are involved in observing and collecting the ballots and so forth. And you also have a chance where you're not just worried about whether or not it's going to get there through the Postal Service. Fears about the post office now are nothing new for me. I've never felt comfortable with putting my ballot in the mail and letting it go out for the Postal Service. I vote either Election Day at a ballot drop box location, because I think that at least gives me some semblance of confidence. But the lawsuit problem, Roshini, I know you're a lawyer, the lawsuit problem that we're going to see in state after state after state could bog down the counting process for weeks. I would be very fearful if we get into Christmas and voters still don't know who the next president is.
Yeah. Well, we have to end it there, and very well said, because that is a scary thought in my mind, and that is totally preventable also with the tools we have at our disposal. Jimmy Sengenberger is the host of Jimmy at the Crossroads. That's a web show and podcast in partnership with the Washington Examiner. He's also the host of the Jimmy Sengenberger Show on Denver's News Talk 710 KNUS. You can follow him on Twitter at Seng Center. Jimmy Sengenberger, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Roshini. I appreciate it.